Hello, and thank you for joining me in this talk about government reform. I wish to start this talk having us honor the inherent human desire to understand and also to be understood. Here today, listening to this, are many different souls who might be nervous, elated, curious, apathetic, even angry about this topic of government reform. Think for a second about how you're feeling. Give yourself permission to feel that way. Realize that others here may be feeling a similar way. Sit for a minute with the sacredness of how our lives brought us here today to listen and maybe learn from an insider's perspective about this most important topic of government reform through commitment to quality management and social responsibility. Though I never released any classified information to which I was granted access, I was aware that being critical of my country would welcome charges of sedition, additional surveillance, possible revoke of my security clearances, and even intimidation from government officials, and more. Just as citizens honor their government by demanding the highest level of excellence from it, so do civil servants who willingly put themselves through ordeals like I did in speaking truth to power. Our reluctance to receive inconvenient messages, though, becomes a barrier to ensuring excellence in government. It's true that one cannot make an omelet without breaking eggs, yet often breaking eggs feels more like getting hit over the head with a skillet. And I hope you find that in making the points that I make and that are difficult to accept, that I do so in a careful and reasonably gentle way. In this talk today, I will describe a bit about my journey with government reform, which will provide more context to the questions of why me. My perspective is a result of a unique path in life, which has given me a perspective that I believe to be incredibly useful at the current moment. From a place of privilege, I have chosen again and again to help address substantial suffering and progress with the careers that I've chose. First as a paramedic, then as an emergency manager specializing in weapons of mass destruction, and as a government reformer auditing IT system implementations, and also as a manager in public health. Along the way, I've adapted or created diagrams and concepts that convey important realizations about government. I'm here today because of my belief in my country as exceptional and exceptionally suited to be leaders in the progress of our species and stewardship of the globe. However, I assess that we are far from the greatness required of us. We live in a facade of freedom under a government that is more an oligarchy than a political economic meritocracy. And we are embarrassingly reluctant to resist and correct our issues. My work in national security has me very concerned that war, not just with other countries, but also within racial groups and our citizenry at large, is too easy for our elected officials to instigate, given how much faith we grant them. I firmly believe that our path to world peace requires us to stop feeding ourselves false faiths that feel good and start serving truth and making some reforms essential to our freedom, our well being, and the well being of the earth. This is the last of my three TEDx-style talks aimed at increasing collective awareness. The first focused on our need for a renewed spirit of civic engagement and community to overcome our fault lines of racism, sexism, and caste, while the second talk was a unique comparative analysis of religion and spirituality. By the end of this third talk, though, I hope you'll have more of an insider's perspective into how we citizens can stop allowing the 0.1% to manipulate our government and firmly adopt what is actually true, which is that we the people have choices and power over our three-branch government structure. Because I know context is important and human nature is to judge the person, not their ideas, I'm going to share some about my relationship with government. To help you understand why I find it worthy of your time to listen to my thoughts about government reform. As a teen, I took an interest in emergency medical services. I spent 10 years as a paramedic and also had some advanced rescue and firefighting training. At age 23, I was a lieutenant in charge of the care of over 200 EMTs, and eventually I was voted onto the board of directors of one of the most reputable volunteer firehouses in the state. Yet I was still not senior enough to incite real change in the bigoted public safety culture that I saw, and I eventually withdrew from such efforts out of conscience and exhaustion. Along the way, I got hired to support the US Department of Energy in nuclear emergency management. In short, I applied business process reengineering to underdeveloped national emergency response capabilities through exercise planning and evaluation. And in doing so, I helped solve some problems that engineers at the national laboratories had struggled with for decades. Soon, I had not just top secret SCI clearance, as do a million other folks in the country, but I also had Q clearance, which involves specialized knowledge of nuclear weapons and nuclear response capabilities that's never declassified, unlike other forms of classified information. I have fewer qualms about telling you this because our Office of Personnel Management has been hacked many times, and our enemies know the names of cleared individuals, knew them a long time ago. In this role at the Department of Energy, I was recognized for things like pulling night shifts during Fukushima Daiichi response, but also unofficially was mocked for caring that lessons from evaluation reports were often found over and over again without corrective actions being heeded. And so I again departed, partially due to conscience. I shifted over to the US Veterans Affairs, where I applied my analytic systems logic in lead of a team of IT system implementation auditors, who in 5 months identified failures in requirements definition, change management, system testing, and overall accountability in the implementation approach being used by a major IT company. Though we were correct, our contract was terminated, and the service disabled veteran owned small business for which I worked appealed at great cost. And a client shared with me that he was forced to testify before Congress about it, to which there was not justice done, in my opinion, at least not for my team, which included three single moms, two of them Black, all forced to find other work. It was not pleasant to let them down during uh, during a year which had growing police brutality issue in 2014. Next, I took a more than $60,000 pay cut when I switched from the high-level federal contracting work to local emergency preparedness with Montgomery County Department of Health and Human Services. Though there was no drop-off in the importance of the work, I was doing comprehensive analysis and risk assessment of threats and hazards and using it to inform emergency response capability development. Again, I specifically had a hand in bringing basic medical training standards to every police officer in the county, accelerated preparedness for family reunification scenarios, and helped develop the curriculum for a group of 50 multi faith leaders to become some of the first emotional and spiritual care volunteers in the world. I debated staying in county government, but old friends and high salary drew me back to the US Department of Energy again, where, among other tasks, I conducted a thorough policy analysis that identified over 5,000 policies relevant to my agency, though we only acknowledged five of them. And this is because the way new laws fail to rescind the old and instead pile on. My finding of more effective method to sort and track policies was not received well by clients, which I chuck up more to a lack of faith in the corrupt system than in their lack of ability to do what I did. I did also expose some curious financial practices reflecting a dubious relationship between our sister office and congressional appropriators. And previously, my objecting had been during the Obama administration, but after less than a year under the rump, a true teller like me was plainly run out without defense or recourse. So I accepted deep financial losses by objecting, losing out on $130,000 a year salary, plus burning $50,000 a year of savings as I had prepared my books, messages, and consulting toolkits, which required cutbacks and a majorly reduced lifestyle for me. I was consciously weaning myself into a state in which I could tolerate if I were imprisoned, either falsely or by my own choice. Fortunately, I made some favorable investments and managed to keep up with the mortgage payments and not lose my house. Being self-conscious about profiting off activism, though, it took me years to accept that I needed to self-promote better. Being firm about the destruction being done by unchecked capitalism, it took me years to accept being a slave to money, to admit that the path of freedom is for each of us to be independent contractors and to self-promote in a world that really resents hubris, especially from people who look like me. So on top of these kind of financial fears, I battled self-pity, self-righteousness, and identity issues. I was compelled to find new social circles and work to combat their suspicion that I might be a spy or a saboteur, which is understandable, yet ironic to me, given my own suspicion that the most powerful movement leaders are operatives and informants. As a consultant at the Veterans Affairs, I was introduced to the highest form of change management, which is called active resistance management, whereby authority in leading a change grooms not just the change leaders, but secretly influences the opposition leaders as well, who are then positioned to thwart change, obstruct it, validate it, kill it, and prevent the rise of other opposition leaders who might be more effective. This is one way in which the deep state goes deeper than most realize, but I am getting ahead of myself. I did eventually, during COVID-19, try county public health again, and I found the progressive workforce there still too difficult for someone as wounded as I was by past negative experiences with government work. I managed to help county public health leaders instill equity in their services, mostly by indoctrinating more people of color into emergency management, a workplace culture that is rarely inclusive. I'm very proud of this work, and I proved to myself that I was still capable of repeated 50-hour work weeks. But the position ultimately affirmed my choice to resign from knowledge work until maybe one day the conditions get better for workers. Any more than 20 hours a week is just not tolerable to someone who knows how government could and should operate. In my weaker moments along this journey, I would start to give into thinking my knowledge of the world and its problems was a curse. But I know that it wasn't the knowledge, it was being fringe, being unaccepted and gaslit continuously. Knowing this ultimately made me more sure that more individuals are needed to be conscientious objectors, boycotting knowledge work until it's raised to a proper status, until overwork is shunned and workplace coaches and psychologists are deemed as essential as they are in frivolous fields like professional sports. So, to summarize my story, I choose to sit on the sidelines of this rigged economic game, while those who didn't have either the knowledge or the courage to object are still in positions of influence. They have a debt to the rest of us, and I hope they will make the changes within themselves and never hesitate to do the right thing when needed. If you find me arrogant or boastful for saying this, take comfort in knowing that I must not actually be too smart, or I would not have ended up in these situations, maybe, or at least not been in them over and over like this. But enough about my traumas. I know what you care about is my learning about government. After leaving the federal government the third time, I turned my energetic, analytical mind to studying the underlying causes of oppression, which I saw as a symptom of a deep state agendas that pit the 0.1% against we the people. Now, I know a lot of people are extraordinarily closed off to anything resembling claims of conspiracy, yet just as many others are so overly eager to believe in conspiracies, they they discard logic in order to pursue the validation of their fears of it. Edward Snowden articulates it well when he says, "The greatest conspiracies are open and notorious. They're not theories, but practices expressed through law and policy and systems of government, technology, and finance. Conspirators more often than not announce their intentions. The truest conspiracies meet with the least opposition." End quote. The books like The Devil's Crossword and Jakarta Method make a far better case for the existence of a deep state. I, of course, am far from the first person to recognize it in the US. In fact, I came to realize rather late that the root of the world's resentment toward us is that we ail from what de Tocqueville called a facade of freedom, to which we are blind or apathetic. In a past writing I call Citizen Paper number 3, I discuss the more notorious examples of our non-greatness: slavery, Jim Crow, Trail of Tears, coup of Hawaii, internment of Japanese Americans, the Tuskegee experiments, use of military force in Iraq, the US Patriot Act, and more. Today, I want to highlight how awful injustices are certainly evident through our worst Supreme Court decisions as well. The Dred Scott decision, 1857. Voting 7-2, the Supreme Court ruled that all people of African ancestry, slaves as well as those who were free, could never become citizens of the United States and therefore could not sue in federal court. The court also ruled that the federal government did not have the power to prohibit slavery in the territories. In 1873, the Slaughterhouse case, in a 5-4 decision, ruled that the Privileges and Immunities Clause only applied to federal citizenship, not state citizenship, thereby gutting the rights ensured by the 14th Amendment. In another 5-4 decision in U.S. versus Cruikshank in 1876, Supreme Court held that the U.S. Bill of Rights did not apply to private actors or to state governments, thereby reversing criminal convictions for the civil rights violations committed in aid of anti-Reconstruction murders by the Ku Klux Klan and governments responsible for atrocities like the Colfax Massacre. In the civil rights cases of 1883, 5 landmark court decisions interpreted the 13th and 14th Amendment in a way that held that Congress did not have the power to outlaw racial discrimination. In 1927, Buck v. Bell, in an 8-1 decision, the 14th Amendment was attacked again when the court held that the Due Process Clause did not prohibit states from performing compulsory sterilization of people deemed unfit. And Citizens United versus the Federal Elections Committee in 2010, a landmark 5-4 decision rescinded the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act and ruled the government could not restrict independent political expenditures by corporations. So perhaps you may be shocked that you had not noticed this atrocious theme of racism in US policy before. To your credit, the 0.1% has quite a number of powerful tools to appease us when we rise up without actually doing anything to fix the underlying issues that they use to keep us divided, suppressed, and oppressed. They play a game of appeasement with us when they must, yet wage war on us with divisive weapons like politics, religion, racism, sexism, ageism, surveillance, capitalism. Just when we're close to progress in one area, we get hit in another and must shift resources away just like they intended, which alienates whistleblowers, journalists, and activists who take major risks to bring issues to our attention. C, worried by the growing success of organized labor movement, which had already led to successful revolution in Russia at the start of the 20th century, the global ruling class in the US masterminded some economic panics, then the Palmer raids of 1919, and then later specifically founded the Bureau of Investigation to target women and prominent people of color, such as Marcus Garvey, Rose Pastor Stokes, Cyril Briggs, Emma Goldman, and other community leaders gaining influence within the labor force. The defense against this onslaught, of course, is improved checks and balances, community organizing, unionizing, whistleblowing, and good journalism. The journalists, though, cannot be trusted when even the news agencies with public in the title, NPR and PBS, are actually funded by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a corporation for public broadcasting, similarly to how the Federal Reserve is headed by private interests that are never known, appointed, or otherwise held accountable by us. Beyond plainly overwhelming our media and other community leaders, the 0.1% uses tricks to incapacitate the unions and media organizations that our founders intended to be our checks, balances, and defenses. They control media, entertainment, religion, and they use it to drown us with happy podcasts and and to preach phony financial rewards for our hustle, instead of promoting the excellent governance that would expose the manipulation of how our labor productivity fulfills only the richest financial needs, and yet hardly our own. In citizen paper number 3, I illustrate what I see as a century of 20-year cycles by a repeating oppression of the ruling class via media-driven fear, labor policy, and economic policy, not to mention the other tools consistently in use: education policy, the two-party system, election policy, the police state, which protects the ruling class interests above all. Eventually, we collectively are going to get smart enough and figure out how to breach this wall containing us. It is inevitable. Our country did not start off this way. Indeed, it was exceptional at its founding, championing self-governance, liberty, freedom, justice for all. What made us exceptional, though, was that our founders used the opportunity to examine all the policies and ideas in existence at that time and to select the best among them. Being self-governed, we can again examine the principles of power and economy that ensures freedom and justice while promoting as much liberty as possible. The principles of power that such a nation ought to uphold for democratic governance are contained within the clause "of the people, by the people, for the people," where "of the people" implies that a merit-based social mobility exists, "by the people" requires popular voting and electoral weighting by state, and "for the people" demands optimizing the benefits of pluralism with minimal detriment to liberty. Based on these principles, we can describe an ideal form of governance between called democratic federalism as the best balance between the extremes of authoritarian nationalism and practically anarchy. Similarly, we can identify the principles for economic equity within a nation. One widely accepted principle for an excellent economy is that profiteering aids innovation, imports, and global influence. Because of this, I am not for elimination of private property, only for elimination of market failures that create injustice. Less widely recognized, however, is the principle that absent any failures, markets naturally optimize production and consumption. Failures do occur, though, and those with the false sense that an economy is just when it isn't, they exploit the fear of socialism as an attack on those who recognize the injustice and demand reform. A third principle of an excellent economy is that, absent any evaluation bias, markets naturally optimize investment of goods or the distribution of goods and profits to individuals based on merit. And from these principles can be derived an ideal governance model, economic governance model called meritocracy. And that which best balances between the extremes of corporatism and egalitarianism, and ensures our economy operates by service to others rather than profit-driven incentives that are the cause of injustice. Defined this way, I wish to uphold that meritocracy is an equitable, ideal economic model in how it defines merit, and distinguish it from the concept of the same name described by billionaire hedge fund manager Ray Dalio, conservative political commentary David Brooks, and others. When we achieve balanced economic governance, private ownership of property still exists, so it's nowhere near socialism. However, the financial differences between the haves and the have-nots are made more equitable than they currently are, and the haves don't like that. They don't want word of this reasonable middle ground getting out, and they have already done a remarkable job of keeping us pretty naive about this type of economics. They make us afraid that the big mean government is coming after our private property, when the true headline is that we the people are wresting back our fair share of the 0.1% financial power so that we can all live with dignity. When we cross this political model with the economic model, at what we refer to as the vital center, we get an ideal form of government we can call democratic meritocracy, fair, balanced, and based on valued principles. Though such democratic principles were derived more than any other country from the US as it was envisioned by its founders, our nation is now surprisingly far from this ideal. Not only have we become far from having the class mobility of meritocracy ever since the days of the robber barons, but our government, even with its 250-year checks and balances, is now slipping towards authoritarianism as we the people fail to push back on presidential power, such as when George H.W. Bush referred to his unlimited power in the war on terrorists in Iraq. Then, when the U.S. Patriot Act, with the U.S. Patriot Act, we have, as Benjamin Franklin warned, sacrificed our liberty in hope of safety. Before the rump became president, most citizens thought resistance was a bad thing. I, for one, associated the word with crime, as in resisting arrest. Of course, that was back when I used to hang with cops who made excuses for brutality. Now I know about the Bad Elk versus United States ruling, which clarified our right to resist unlawful arrest, even though that right has been restricted by penal code in many states. As an emergency manager, I used to help plan the government response to mass resistance. This makes me somewhat more aware than most of the criteria of what's justifiable. And I'm here to tell you, with the rump, we were much further down the road of what is justifiable than just peaceful protests that are protected constitutionally under the First Amendment's freedom to assemble and petition for grievances. As much as activists want to be 100% about peace and love and believe that love alone wins, police brutality is a far more desperate situation than can be addressed by some small, short marches, especially when such peaceful methods generate only minor reform. The second stage, resistance, on the other hand, often meets the damage of prolonged injustice with its own passive economic impact in the form of doxing, cancel culture, and forms of civil disobedience. Its justification for our current problem goes way back to 1836, when our citizens first became economically enslaved by the privatization of the Second Bank of the United States, if not back in 1619 with the founding of slavery. Such oppression was reinforced again by the Great Depression and then renewed again with the government's failure to protect worker rights to unionize in the 1960s. And then again, most recently, with the bank bailouts and the Supreme Court decisions, Citizen United decision in 2010. When officials use their authority to quell disobedience without making reasonable reforms to address the problem, such intimidation can and should be met in kind with active tactics of unrest, including property damage and possibly even looting, targeting the president, governors, legislators, and all their accomplices, which includes the people of influence who do nothing for the cause. Whether politicians and police accept this as truth does not make it less true. And this is what we call stage 3 resistance. We the people had grounds for it pretty far back, but it has also been more recently justified given the failure of the rump to A, address the persistent and pernicious problem of police brutality, acknowledged by the United Nations in August of 2014. B, the rump urging a ban on protesting, expressed as early as August 4th, 2018. And C, disinformation, deceit, and misuse of the powers of the office of the president, such as violations of the Posse Comitatus Act when the rump deployed soldiers for domestic missions without providing cause. And then the fourth stage, revolution, violent actions aimed at president, governors, legislators, and their accomplices with the intent to overthrow government officials is also justified, provided the government misuses power in a way that threatens democracy, with little or no check by government, by Congress. For 3 painfully long years, we the people had justification for stage 4 resistance, evidenced by A, the failure of this president to address known concerns of voter fraud, voter suppression, and voter system hacking for the 2018 midterm elections. B, the fact that esteemed individuals with information about this president and later investigators were pleading that we the people recognize blatant obstruction of justice. And C, failure of Congress to address presidential abuse of power, perjury, and ineptitude affecting every government service, not to mention the sheer number and significance of special investigations into the rump during his presidency. I did some classified work in federal continuity of government planning. And in my citizen paper 13, I shared my perspective about what it would look like if the people were to coup up or coup a sitting president of the United States. First off, such an act must be assessed thoroughly. Revolutionaries must anticipate and prepare for repercussion, which means conducting analysis of the supportiveness of some states or all states, and perhaps all the federal departments and agencies controlled by the president. Those states and agencies, however, are dependent on many companies. So our very ability to eject a regime corrupted by corporate interest actually lies in our ability to sway enough corporate interest to get involved, or to at least stay uninvolved. Coup could create a secession of states, which would require support from at least one corporation from the fossil fuel industry. So hopefully the righteous revolutionaries have allies at British Petroleum, Chevron, Shell, Exxon, ConocoPhillips. Ironic, isn't it? To outlast the repercussion, the states must also be supported by corporations essential to the basic needs of citizens. So grocers, hospitals, and pharmacies like CVS, Rite Aid, Walgreens, and Walmart. And also the required children support services like Amazon, FedEx, and UPS. So we must also consider how greatly our ability to independently organize as neighborhoods is still dependent on communication platforms provided by companies like Clear Channel, Comcast, Facebook, Netflix, yes, Sprint, AT&T, T-Mobile, Verizon, and YouTube, to name a few. We can debate when or if our nation was great until we are red or blue in the face, citing Jacksonian undemocracy, the 16th Amendment, Citizens United, and more. Yet it does not change the fact that we, the people of this country, have relinquished our civic duty as the ultimate check on our government. And in our desire to live in luxury, have listened too blindly to the wealthiest among us and adopted principles of government that are good for them, but not good for us. The good news is you can help out. You can help put politicians back under the thumb by helping your community make what I call a triple wide leap, or LEEAP for freedom. In labor, the L, leverage the local jobs network to help keep the people in your neighborhood gainfully employed in jobs that help the community thrive without big corporations. E, economy, ensure an economic safety net for at-risk individuals through properly planned and resourced food, housing, health assistance, and essential services. E, entertainment, build up independent local video and radio programming instead of a nationally controlled propaganda machine. E, education, use local networks to promote civic-minded books, zines, movies, music, podcasts, and classes through edX, Coursera, and community colleges. A, activism. Stand up and support your local chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union, MoveOn.org, the Poor People's Campaign, the Project on Government Oversight, and more. P, policing. Support your local chapter of Black Lives Matter with its lobbying and cop watch program, and lobby Congress to enact a framework for fewer secrets, greater security recommendations within the Century Foundation book called Liberty Under Attack. And this would help us have the data needed to decide how to rein our national government back in instead of having it just throw it out and start over. All around my city, I see Black Lives Matter on hoodies and posted on signs outside houses of worship. I see resist stickers on cars, and that makes me proud to see community organizations coming to support each other in solidarity as one, taking steps to unite to restore the principles that once underscored our great United States. Often resistance takes the form of petitioning for policy changes, but protesting and petitioning aren't the only resistance activities available to us. We can combat the power of our oppressors through our consumption, through culture, by rejecting their goods and rejecting entirely the idea of having wealth. The idea of having wealth being honorable, because in an unjust world, it's not. Still, the best form of resistance, though, is worker strikes. And I believe this Congress is forcing us to resort to such acts of mass desperation. That's why I'm a conscientious objector. There has been, though, in recent times, some key events in the war over the nature of the federal government and excellence in government in general. Reagan's Grace Commission is ironically named given it is credited with the phrase drain the swamp and represents the opposite of grace. It blamed high national debt not on Congress failing to collect on corporations, but on the Internal Revenue Service for failing to collect income tax from citizens. This tax gap wasn't measured for another 2 decades, but in 2001, when it was found to be 345 billion, or roughly 1.7% of the federal budget, hardly enough to have much of an impact on the national deficit. Nonetheless, the claim was used to incite animosity towards civil servants. In 1993, President Clinton and Vice President Gore, inspired by the book Reinventing Government by Gabler and Osborne, sponsored an initiative that established a national performance review for the federal government. Gore championed the initiative in a famous town hall talk with Pentagon employees on August 12th of that year, in which he dialogued about ways the federal government could and should be streamlined. He emphasized the need to look less at what government does, but more how it works, and to do so by collecting information, seemingly for the first time, from the unused brain power of federal employees who have ideas and can be trusted to make decisions. Among other topics, he discussed how federal salary rules result in the departure of employees who are often essential to their offices because their knowledge and devotion goes above and beyond their job description, and they have nowhere to go. He also referred to a straitjacket of rules that have federal employees terrified of making a mistake, whereas the private sector accepts that mistakes happen when trying new things. Gore also presented how the Reinventing Government authors suggested we turn the budget process on its head so that it starts with the results we demand and the price we are willing to pay, rather than the programs we have and what costs they incur. He noted that the authors suggested government be sized and shaped to that effect. These fabulous ideas were, of course, seen as partisan, and 3 months later, conservatives answered with discussion at the famous annual Business Week conference, though only CEOs in the audience were permitted to participate in polling of the audience. Senator William Roth, Republican from Delaware, spoke, referring to the initiative as a good start for its commitment to consolidation of government, though he would still be calling for elimination, specifically elimination of the Department of Commerce, in order to increase the ability of the private sector and to not increase taxes. He urged that governments stay close to the people, which he elaborated to mean more public servant jobs back home in his red state, instead of largely Democratic capital area, which he referred to as kingdoms of Washington. Next spoke Senator Armory Houghton, Republican in New York, who also started by referring to the program as pretty good and not that bold, but then warned about discretionary spending, specifically uh, calling for cost control of health services, his euphemism for denying people health services, which he referred to as entitlements. During his speech, he stated that lawyers produce laws, which is not true, nor funny, but actually very sad and scary, and really shows the degree to which these CEO worshiper types misunderstand government, while asserting that it can be run just like their corporations. The fact that these two speakers were both senators also shows the degree to which government inefficiencies are a result of poor legislators that we elect. In truth, distrust of government does arise from finding government services to be ineffective, inefficient, and inequitable. Yet this is more a reflection of the inadequate funding and the lack of accountability than it is a reflection of a service that would be better off without oversight. Worse, those who stand to gain financially from the lack of oversight fuel the false argument that government is not suited for the power of overseeing corporations, that such power should be entrusted to the very corporations instead of being entrusted to electable officials chosen by the people. These pro-business types, though, they don't actually want our government to work well. They just want to eliminate it, remember? This is true of many government workers, too, who uh, were private sector worshipers trying to get a bead on a path to profits so they could cut a deal with a corporation and leave government work. Some of them perhaps did not start that way, but simply lost faith that their efforts made a difference anymore. Over the past few decades, though, an international movement has been developing around quality management, which arguably invalidates much of the political positioning and posturing that occurs in government. International Standards Organization, ISO 9000, is a standard that expands the idea of excellence in service to what I see as a new performance triad: effectiveness, efficiency, and equity. Whereas recent federal government performance management has focused on effectiveness and efficiency and still falls severely short. The movement towards quality places greater emphasis on equity, maturity, the feedback from voice of the employee and voice of the customer. It also delineates responsibility for each of three levels of a quality management system, which are often confused to this day by those hired to perform quality management responsibilities, like the Dear EMS system in which I used to work. In short, though, there is a quality inspection level of operational tasks that relate to the who, what, where, when, and how of an operation and is measured by productivity metrics like number of widgets or time to produce a widget. Next, there is a quality control level that covers the tactical operations related to monitoring and managing services, which are measured by efficiency metrics like cost per widget or return on investment of a widget. Lastly, there is quality assurance level that covers the strategic actions related to monitoring and managing services, which are measured by equity metrics like fair distribution of widgets or equality of access to widgets. Instead of adhering to this very basic tenet of quality management, though, our Congress builds layers of policy on policy and layers of government on government, creating a controlled chaos that benefits the insiders. This explains how our federal government has such an unclear all of government work breakdown structure with more than 140 national commissions, committees, consortiums, and agencies. In a proper work breakdown structure, for instance, the managerial support functions, finance performance management, capital asset management, human capital asset management, information management, these are currently decentralized into duplicative agencies like the General Services Administration, Office of Management and Budget, Office of Personnel Management, Department of Labor, and each of these overly inflated arms, um, and each with overly inflated arms into each department and agency. Uh, these would be administered via a single government-wide information system called a shared service center. This, or SSC, this SSC started with the President's Management Agenda in 2004. However, the transition continues to this day due to mismanagement and poor understanding of IT service implementation by Congress. I know because I was once a lead oversight contractor for its implementation at the Veterans Affairs. To, to describe it as ineffective would be too kind. It is exactly because I value the trifecta of effectiveness, efficiency, and equity of my government that I am an ardent advocate of good government oversight. Government actually has the potential to be more efficient than the private sector because all of the waste involved in multiple corporations simultaneously doing the same product and service development when ultimately only one best in class is selected. Or I guess sometimes government doesn't actually select just one, as Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and Oracle BI are duplicative web-based office management tools, all used by the Department of Energy simultaneously. Peter Drucker, writing in The Sickness of Government, agrees, and he emphasized occasions for planned abandonment of successful processes when they are no longer useful to combat the natural human tendency for both business and government services to cling to yesterday's successes. Since we cannot abandon government missions, though many in the 0.1% stand to gain from that financially, we can abandon or rethink the processes or the providers of those services, especially when they are redundant. Maturity models are another critical concept within the quality management realm. There are different versions of maturity models, though with this one I have incorporated data management and 5S manufacturing concepts and principles. These are typically seen as advanced business concepts. However, I argue they are truly derived from the kind of service improvement perspective you only get from working in government oversight. At level one, there is no real process improvement tool or set approach, and those attempting to sort out the service do not even have much experience to be considered experts in the inputs, processes, and outcomes for that new service. Next, level two services are being further defined through the application of expert judgment or maybe only prediction markets. Level three services are moving toward optimization through analysis of workflows, algorithms, and data analysis, and are often aided by a body of knowledge or accrediting entity which stewards training and other industry improvement. At level four, data-driven services carefully monitor and react to performance metrics using upper and lower limits to indicate when minor mitigating actions must be taken to control the service. At level five service maturity, it's often described as a general oversight of the other layers that creates a culture of performance management. However, it is so much more than that. A truly sustained service involves complete analysis of all the potential impacts to inputs, steps, and stakeholders in the service process, to the point that the service model is entirely defined, applying a principle called mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. More anticipatory than reactive when it comes to risk and issues that arise, the level five service must be continually monitoring uncertainty principles using data forecasting, probability analysis, prediction simulations, and risk costing. It must move beyond the focus entirely on compliance and even create cycles of experimentation, regularly testing innovative approaches collected from intentionally diverse perspectives prone to why thinking and outside the box thinking, in order to prevent an organization from easing into fixed mindset groupthink about how things are always done, only to then be surprised when innovation is made, often by a competitor. See, innovation is stunted when teams are not composed of mixtures of original thinkers, beginner brains, and Y thinkers who challenge approaches, actions, and authority. Further, mid-level government authorities need to reflect a balance of divergent approaches and personas, which can only be achieved by replacing individual responsibilities with trios or small teams that together have shared responsibility, so that together the group suffers fewer blind spots than any individual. Advancement of government, then, to the highest level of quality requires significant change, a paradigm shift from an outreach mindset that we operate by today to an integration mindset where agencies value and fully incorporate diversity in demographics, cultures, creeds, and abilities to help the organization evaluate risk. Another element of quality management involves integration of feedback from both employees and customers, because camaraderie, accountability, and transparency are essential workplace elements that help fulfill personal psychological needs. Whether in public, private, or nonprofit organizations, the productivity of a workforce is severely dependent on the organization's culture. Large corporations fall, and startups never get off the ground because of workplace culture. Think of Weinstein Company. Employees today care about the image of their employers and are demanding an inspiring workplace culture that motivates through appreciation, not exploitation. More often, employees are voting with their feet by leaving. Optimizing employee satisfaction ultimately improves camaraderie and cohesion within teams. It helps identify and resolve conflicts, including those related to race, gender, class, age, and ableism. And it empowers employees with the support and safety to be themselves, which is a basic requirement for employees to be their best and most productive. Productivity loss aside, though, the harm caused by disgruntled employees today looks like fatal online reviews and boycotts spread via word of mouth. And worse, when disgruntled employees stay in an organization, their bad attitudes are a drag on customer satisfaction. On the other hand, employers that listen to individual needs and attitudes can have a great success motivating employees to do their job with excellence and energize their teams to do the same, and have a devoted workforce. It's necessary for the organization to survive adversity or crisis. So look at it as a business continuity aspect. Peter Drucker actually argued that employees were not liabilities, but assets, and in fact, the organization's most valuable resource. He coined the term knowledge worker and taught that knowledgeable workers are the essential ingredients of a modern economy. Whether profit-based or impact-based, voice of employee data is critical to attract talent, retain reliable workers, avoid worker burnout, prevent worker shortages, optimize worker productivity, aid long-term worker retention of effective employees, and ensure a favorable experience for both employees and employers. This is a mutually beneficial relationship because employee satisfaction is one of the largest factors impacting customer satisfaction and therefore profits. Employees are the face of the organization and the energy of it. And sometimes store clerks are even willing to endanger themselves to prevent the store from being robbed. And that is the power of VOE. Comprehensive VOE data includes measurements of emotional intelligence quotients and disc theory, which all makes for some pretty revealing analysis about the characteristics of employees who make it to the top. To ensure effectiveness of teams and key workplace relationships, workforce must commit to assessing employee personality using tools like Foresight, Strength Finder, and Change Style Inventory. These analyses inform employers on how to help employees reach their full potential and how to integrate employees into teams better. I say integrate because the term upholds the value of diversity far better than the term inclusion, which reeks of this unearning or undeserving come up that's granted to those who are not already integrated. The point is, workplaces need to have a culture of appreciation for diversity and open communication of the pressures employees face. Some roles, like chief of staff especially, must be experts of managing the styles of multiple executives who may be super systematic or super relational, um, or some blend in between. Executive coaches must know how to foster executive strengths and also to guide those multiple clients towards improvement in their areas of weakness. Still, many employers fear employee feedback, arguing against helping employees see their own dissatisfaction. However, it is actually riskier for employees to not know about worker weaknesses or issues affecting morale. Empowering employees to communicate openly not only helps the organization, it helps our society defeat worker exploitation, which more greatly affects marginalized groups. So equity in business therefore means upholding not only consumer protection and satisfaction, but employee protection also. And this is done by monitoring and managing diversity data. Standing in stark contrast to VOE and VOC are authoritative bosses who promote a sense of urgency and perfectionism that only creates defensiveness and destruction in team dynamics. These types of leaders, so-called leaders, insist on motivating through fear and financial disincentive, like losing healthcare or other employee benefits. Jason Fried, in his book, It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work, makes a good case for a calm corporate culture with realistic deadlines, reasonable hours, few meetings, and autonomy. I'm also a fan of a Forbes article called 10 Unmistakable Signs of a Bad Place to Work, which discusses things like dictated hours, progressive discipline, and payroll deductions. Empowered employees, though, must look beyond compensation-related incentives like merit awards, bonuses, stock options, and investment support. Here's a few signs of quality employers that Forbes forgot to tell you. 1, understands that no one can maintain 100% effort continuously. In short, workplaces where employees cannot communicate when they're having an off day due to an illness, personal issue, etc., are just unhealthy. On my teams, I expected just 80% effort and even build it into project schedules. What I found was when times called for me to ask for a push from workers, I got it. And even then, I only expected, say, 95%. But in my experience, workers can be very committed to the mission and will sustain a push far longer than is good for them, and will eventually lose faith in their employees, in their employers. And that's what I did. And I switched jobs every 2 or 3 years because all I knew how to do was push, push, push myself. My employers and clients loved it, yet not once did they care enough about me to teach me a healthier way and to earn real loyalty from me. And let that be a lesson for you. All right, number two, uh, good workplace supports employee empowerment through union membership instead of discouraging it. Unions have a well established history of advocating and advancing workplace safety, advocating for fair wages and benefits for workers through collective bargaining, especially in the coal and steel industry in my home state of West Virginia. Good employers also encourage employment as 1099 independent contractors, which gives the employee greater influence over their schedule and ability to make decisions about their career direction and accommodate family needs. Good for good for parents. Workers, be self-employed because it gives you power over your schedule and salary, not because you like the power of controlling the salary and schedule of others. Don't be a dick. Three, enables access to well-regarded training, education, employee coaches, and other employee development, as well as to employee separation services like job placement when the agreed employment time is coming to an end. Four, conducts change management properly during mergers, acquisitions, expansions, consolidations, furloughs, and other major workforce transformations that show employees are valued and not merely replaceable parts or guinea pigs subject to poor strategic planning, management of risk, and the whims of reactive executives. Number five, upholds commitment to issue reporting, inquiry, and action. An environment that is not safe to disagree is absolutely an environment focused on employee control, not growth. This is exactly my thought back when the US Department of Energy, when an admiral said, "Shame on you," to me for presenting some of the very lessons in this talk. Foreign to him, he instead chose to refer to innovative ideas as theoretical. I respected his positional authority, but I was really thinking shame on him for not being open, let alone informed, about how to do his job better, make our government greater, and make the world safer. The nuclear engineers I worked with received feedback rather well. It was those command and control military types with the posturing and power hoarding problems. Federally, we the people need to vastly improve the entire process of reporting, inquiring, and correcting issues brought up by citizens and civil servants. The entire system of accountability, which includes info gathering via Freedom of Information Act, two, complaints to inspectors general, three, appeals to journalists and nonprofits like OpenGovHub and Project on Government Oversight, four, audits by Government Accountability Office, and five, decisions by a judiciary, all failed under the rump, if not before. This federal system of issue management requires not only reform but also re-education of the civil servants and the public. Too many of us doubt our ability to make a difference when we report issues. When we lack faith in that system, most of us eventually decide to just look after ourselves. And as the saying goes, leaders who don't listen are eventually surrounded by people with nothing to say. There are drastic actions that civil servants and others can and do take to fight corruption. However, speaking out is too great a sacrifice, which means that we must set up a society that is firm in rewarding righteousness and even firmer in deterring self interest. We government workers have a saying: don't attribute to malice what can be explained by stupidity. It's known as Hanlon's razor, and it's a nice compliment to Occam's razor, which also seems to describe our inefficient government. Hanlon's razor, though, is a thing because it's difficult for civil servants and the public to distinguish corruption from incompetence, and the corrupt in power prefer it that way. Corrupt power also prefers a world without quality because corruption cannot exist where there is commitment to quality management principles. Much to the chagrin of the corporatists and their misinformed minions of our federal government is in fact responsible for conducting quality assurance oversight of all commerce. Even the billions of research and development dollars sent to Boeing, General Electric, Northrop Grumman, SpaceX, and more. Especially that, actually. I know this because I've worked at high levels at the nexus of national security and science and technology with agencies charged with combating terrorism and transnational crime. So I have a little knowledge about how to eliminate corruption between corporations and power. Here are my 7 keys, which are somehow controversial, despite the fact that they disrupt the established power structure and status quo, even though that is what the majority of us say we want. The first key to promoting quality and fighting corruption in government services is for Congress to actually fully fund and staff agencies to be able to provide the level of service and oversight of contracts, instead of forcing civil servants to operate by the short-staffed job manual. We need to do a better job identifying and exposing conflicts of interest in large government contracts, especially the big 5 consulting firms and think tanks that make up part of the revolving door of government officials doing dirty deeds. We are really bad at examining that revolving door and nepotism of elected officials. And by we, I mean the Department of Justice's Public Integrity section. The think tanks and the big 5 consulting firms actually need to be replaced with nonprofit consortiums like the one I used to work for, Oak Ridge Associated Universities, because these organizations are at least held partly accountable by credible experts in the scientific community and academics, instead of wealthy individuals the public knows nothing about, and even if we did, we would have no way of holding them accountable. Third, quality cannot exist in commerce without more effective oversight of government contracts. This is actually one of the places competition can be beneficial, as long as there isn't an asymmetry of information that benefits insiders. In the Reinventing Government initiative I mentioned earlier, Al Gore emphasized the need to explore electronic bidding marketplaces to bring ease to contracting and substitute digital info instead of paper. This succeeded in a way, but we are now faced with an unnecessarily and likely intentionally overly complicated grant and contract coding system, which only serves the insiders best able to benefit from the chaos over a more logical set of mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive elements of industry. So if we are going to be a society of quality, we need to simplify the NAICS industry codes, company schedule categories, and convoluted contract types and specifications in FedBizOps or whatever other government contracting system to maximize consumer access to information and level the playing field for businesses to compete against the same handful of big corporations and their subsidiaries and partners. Fourth, set-asides for small businesses, minority-owned businesses, women-owned small businesses, minority women-owned small businesses, service-disabled veteran-owned small businesses, and 8A businesses who are embarrassingly low and need to be increased to represent a greater share of government contracts. Because frankly, the bigs are mediocre, which is how an emergency management expert like me was able to lead a team to evaluate IBM on a $1 billion government contract and within 5 months report the project to be 13 months behind. The big firms either overstate their knowledge or they are corrupt or possibly both. Fifth, more effective information exchange for labor is needed to facilitate matching of available jobs with all the many candidate profiles using artificial intelligence technologies and all the data and analysis government has collected on us to assess both our suitability and merit for positions. Such an information exchange would replace Career Builder, Clearance Jobs, Indeed, and all those headhunter services and their spam emails and cold calls. It would eliminate the asymmetry of information surrounding job seeking for both public and private sectors and reconcile some of the obstacles for women, veterans, and disadvantaged candidates. It would also be an opportunity to simplify the established, overcomplicated set of labor categories, help promote standardization of skills, salary, and training in all industries and across the public and private sector to help establish career pathways between professionals with similar skills. In improving this new labor system, we must remove the incentive for politicians to just create jobs for job's sake, or we will never have efficiency. Therefore, we must guarantee a job for all, and then set a standard work week based on that. If it's less than 30 hours, so be it. That gain is a reflection of human innovation, and the rewards ought to be shared more equitably across humankind. If individuals choose to work more hours, good on them, but minimum wage needs to be livable and dignified. Quality management cuts non-essential steps, non-essential processes, non-essential jobs, and non-essential organizations, making government services easier for customers to use and also easier to hold elected officials accountable, which is the very reason it has been slow to take hold among people in positions of power. Another reason is that mature services greatly reduce officials' ability to oust their adversaries, hire their friends, and otherwise unfairly manipulate services and staffing to hoard power. In this twisted government game of leverage and who you know, negotiating is essential to getting what you want and getting people to do what you want. This is the sick aspect of the corrupt political game no one talks about. Instead, you hear the euphemism about how the key to politics is controlling the message, which means that media management comes first, while quality management and good policy comes second, if at all. This brings us to the media, which is supposed to be an instrument of the people. Instead, media, both mainstream and fringe, are owned and operated by big business and only pretends to expose government corruption and effectiveness of commercial oversight. Next, please realize what Nobel laureate economist Paul Krugman has been hammering into us, that the stock market is not the economy. It's nothing but another game that 0.1% plays and used to drain working class people of our savings and assets, which is why I call it the suck market. When you realize this, you can comprehend why the 0.1% feed us myths about our economy and want us to think of equity in purely financial fashion, other than its sociological definition. The good news is more of us are getting wiser about how we spend our time and our money. We are avoiding luxury goods, new fads and other overpriced goods, and companies that are not socially responsible. Internationally, the United Nations is developing sustainable developmental goals for social responsibility. Domestically, the body that advances social responsibility is the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which was legislated after a big push by Senator Elizabeth Warren for financial transparency, if not nationalization, of the Federal Reserve Bank. So despite my having some certifications and knowledge of how to run organizations effectively, efficiently, and equitably, I have never been striving to be a CEO, which I believe is because I have a conscience. Of those CEO types, and if they had any integrity, they wouldn't have chosen their path, and they would rapidly change their ways and repent. It is also from being a conscientious objector that I removed all of my savings from the stock market upon the election of the Rump. Sure enough, the gains of the past 4 years were tainted. Blood money from the deaths of Yemeni children, uninsured citizens, COVID fraud, corporate tax breaks, and subsidies. Sadly, those among us blindly striving for the private sector actually make things worse by perpetuating that corrupt system. They are fighting for the wrong team, especially the politicians and political science majors. I am so pleased that my 18-year-old self, who, when I first registered to vote, decided to register as an independent to remain clear of political party influence. Then again, I got my master's degree in public policy because good policy focuses on what is real and what is right, not the politics of what makes a good soundbite and sways voters, or the business of how to play the game and not disrupt it. John Adams warned us that political parties could be the death of democracy, and George Washington reaffirmed it in his farewell address. In the war of corporations against good government, we are on a side, whether we choose to consciously or not. And this might be difficult for you to accept, but your participation in politics instead of civics is more seditious than anything I've ever said. It is un-American. We need to stop. We expect political courage from leaders we choose, but we ourselves too are often choosing self-interest over courage. Until that day comes, what we have is an oligarchy, where wealthy interests own Congress instead of being overseen by them. That is how seriously we need government reform, or else the great global experiment of democracy is going to fail, and it will do so on our watch. So we've discussed the need to compel our legislators to include measures like maturity and equity and performance management if we're to become a species that can govern with quality. Well, like the International Quality Management Standard, underlines the importance of sort of equity, voice of the employee, and voice of the customer. So does the International Standards Organization ISO 26000, which focuses on social responsibility. In addition, an additional concept of social responsibility, however, is the concept of impact investing, which is the use of organizational, often corporate influence to incentivize or promote equity in governments, human rights, environment, and important community initiatives. Guess what? Peter Drucker also believes strongly that corporations have a responsibility to the whole of society. If we want to live in a socially responsible world, we need to start withholding our dollars from corporations until they start showing us some impact in these areas. Area 1, human rights. By promoting civil and economic rights via internal statements, public statements, abandonment of sponsorships and donations, and doing due diligence to avoid complicity and discrimination, torture, and exploitation of vulnerable groups. In environment, which can be done by encouraging conservation, restoration, and biodiversity, eliminating unsustainable patterns of production and consumption to reduce resource use. And in communities by investing in civic events, culture, wellness, education, skill development, and small business loans to promote sustainable social structures. In complete honesty, social responsibility requires that an organization sometimes do what is right, even when it is less profitable in the short term. To the corporatists I talk to, this argument is appalling, and they are only partly relieved, bless their heart, to hear how this ultimately preserves the public image and profitability of the corporation in the long term. Impact investing occurs at very small scales, if at all, which is where we, the people, are forced to turn to the oversight role of government to correct this market failure. Congress needs to do so by creating tax incentives to companies that make responsible impacts in these three areas, in addition to raising the corporate tax back to 53%, where it was in 1968. We, the people, however, also have power to compel corporations to improve when they have an embarrassing level of charitable giving. In his biography, Memoirs, David Rockefeller pleads with his crony friends to donate just 2% of their earnings. And that is not even close to the 10% tithe that's proposed on poor people by the church, which means that the 0.1% can't even do better than poor people. And yet they want us to call them elite. This is why my bar is for large corporations to contribute 11% of after-tax revenue to these most important causes. Otherwise, I suggest our spending be done at locally owned businesses. Cheers to cancel culture. One of my solutions to informing the public and aiding government accountability is Mark's List Live, a free cancel culture database I developed using scorecards to evaluate not just corporations, but also conduct evaluations of nonprofits, USA officials, USA government, and world governments, which you can find for free on my social media. The analysis on whether the USA is great or not reveals we are surely not. No agency is using highly developed data stewardship or operating by controlled processes, meaning our federal government services are at best a level 3 maturity out of 5. In evaluating USA elected officials, anti-freedom actions are found in 4 of 9 justices, 58 of 100 senators, 208 of 435 representatives, and 10 of 50 governors, the president and the vice president, as of 2019. Evaluations of corporations are not far along. However, research reveals that the Better Business Bureau doesn't hide that its mission is to advance marketplace trust, which is a conflict of interest. And of the 20 largest charities in the US, the Task Force for Global Health earns a B-, while 3, the YMCA, Direct Relief, and AmeriCares, earn a C-. The rest are at D-. None are CARF accredited, and there is a severe lack of transparency in religious organizations, which are not required to file IRS 990s. In comparison, other developed nations weren't too much better. Only Australia, Israel, Italy, Japan, Singapore, and Spain earned a grade of D. The rest are at E, mostly due to low scores in healthcare efficiency. Most nations out there are prone to abuse of power, including many that seek to proliferate and use weapons of mass destruction. Some notable ones are authoritarian regimes like China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia. But the list of flawed democracies also includes the United States, along with countries like India, Israel, and Italy, according to the Democracy Index. Add in our incessant indiscretions and improprieties in foreign military engagements, and the world has plenty of reason to be mistrustful of us. Our mistakes alienate us, resulting in reduced influence, which means our adversaries, even the authoritarian ones with nuclear programs, actually gain influence, along with those who partner with them. It means our moral and military missteps move us closer to war and make the world a less safe place. That's geopolitics. On the other hand, geopolitics also requires engaging adversaries from a position of strength, or else there can be no diplomacy. Only when our adversaries are faced with improbable war options do they actually negotiate, and then only when presented a pathway to peace, which for us often means getting them to place greater value on freedom and justice. A pathway to peace is exactly the intention behind the conditional promise of an illustrious New World Order, in which global finance will be stewarded by global regions and not just the United States dominantly. However, it sure weakens our foundation for negotiation and makes diplomacy difficult when our citizens, in our voting at home, show that we do not value or understand these virtues that make our country great. In the decades of facing these authoritarian foes, or perhaps in the face of our ignorance of them, our citizenry has become inherently fearful. And instead of electing champions of freedom and justice, we elect leaders with proclivity towards authoritarianism. For an illusion of safety, we fail to ensure our military adheres to the just war theory, not realizing it is our support for these policies of authoritarian leaders that make us even more what the world resents about us. Given the naivete of our citizenry and the unwise choices that we make in our lives, it's easy for those in power to become disenchanted with the idea of democratic self governance, which requires a sensible and civilly engaged electorate. Still, the safest form of governance is undoubtedly a democratic one, where power lies in leaders that must be elected, rather than in a ruling class that can't be scrutinized and held accountable by the people. With global security like a wrecking ball, the world needs a strong force to be a stabilizer of that ball, not another instigator causing it to swing wildly and rapidly. As the major military on Earth, we in the US have a responsibility to the world. Being the dominant military on the globe, we need to be a stabilizing force for freedom, liberty, and justice for all. To do so, we must have respectability and credibility on the global stage, which is why we must limit our mistakes and show we actually give a damn about people and their cultures. Only then will we have a world free and just for all. I hope you're intrigued and look further into consider donating to Mark's List so I can continue that work, as the data hasn't been updated since 2019. I'm open to partnerships with credible, like minded organizations, though, with an objective and independent instrument like this, I, of course, can't create conflicts of interest by accepting corporate sponsorships. So, success really depends on crowdsourcing from independent donors or by funding it myself. I hope you realize that difficulty funding resistance efforts like this is a reason why government accountability organizations are so small and powerless. It ought to give you pause that some of the more powerful organizations that exist to promote government accountability might have conflicts of interest or secretly sold out without you even knowing. They sure don't seem to have the knowledge or the intention to suggest evaluative scorecards like this one, anyway. When looking for those you trust, I suggest you look for those, like me, who attempt to empower you with powerful and credible knowledge. In summary, here are what I see as the 7 keys to ensuring great governance and creating a great society. First, we must adopt democratic meritocracy as the ideal politico-economic vital center model for equity in power, which is called freedom, and equity in economy, which is called justice. Second, we must elect leaders who give a damn about people and their cultures, enough to have the political courage to legislate careful military action and to preempt war through nonviolent diplomacy. A real leader of integrity would have the courage to improve our productivity and economy as a community by inspiring us with a sense of shared purpose. She would say to us, "We in the US have the correct value system, but our adversaries are still too powerful, and we need to work harder to make the world safer and freer." I believe if this were to happen, we would have the most productive workforce in the world in no time. Third, a great society promotes greater participation in resistance, leveraging consumer power through doxing and counterculture, and leveraging worker power through unionizing, whistleblowing, worker strikes, and 1099 employment advocacy. Unfortunately, I can tell you from experience that government still has too much of an expectation that consulting services be provided by full-time workers, a precedent which was set by the big five consulting firms and their copycats. Fourth, participate in neighborhood networks that promote healthy labor, economy, entertainment, education, activism, and policing. LEAP. And where they don't exist, organize them. De Tocqueville, who I mentioned in the beginning of this talk, spoke critically of our facade of freedom and this experiment in democracy, happened to also notice that one of the discriminators of Americans was our deep association with volunteer and civic associations of all kinds, which extended democracy beyond the scope of elected offices. Let's do more of that. Fifth, quality management demands assessment of voice of the employee, voice of the customer, service maturity, and service equity, which has the added benefit of combating corruption. Sixth, social responsibility demands we readjust the corporate tax rate and incentivize responsible impact investing and demand corporations donate 11% of their after-tax revenue to critical human rights, the environment, and communities in need. And lastly, we the people would be wise to sponsor and support growth and wide adoption of government evaluation databases like Mark's List. One of the things that I've found in my discussions of government is that some of us see the US as the world's greatest hope, while as many of us see us as the world's greatest threat. However, both can be true. As stewards of the most powerful economy and most powerful military in the world, the US has a crucial role in the war on the people, being dominated by the private sector that prioritizes profit over equity. We must never forget that democracy is not only the best option, it's the only option. And we must stay vigilant as citizens, not just to protect democracy, but to continue to coax corrupt companies to get on board with democracy as well. The kind of power, global power that the US has in the wrong hands is extremely dangerous. It is critical that we, the people, form a more perfect government that never lets dictators get control of it or even make progress towards such end. It's up to us. Achieving world peace requires us in the US to advance international standards of quality management and social responsibility. Our ability to influence this war resides not just in our voting, but in our choices as consumers and as workers. Our power exists in our ability to ensure oversight and inject transparency into the connections between Congress and corporate and nonprofit executives. In this effort, I really hope it has become evident whose advice to seek. Those with the knowledge to fix government have difficulty lasting in government, so few actually have it. Neither do those in the private sector, though. You have to work in government reform to understand how to do it. We really need to listen to the former reformers, the conscientious objectors. All right, that ends this talk. We covered some heavy stuff again, so please be sure to meditate and spend some time being mindful of the beauty that you've helped create today, and do at least one more delightful thing that brings you joy. Feel free to hire me to work with your organization through my website, whoismarkdenome.com, or by emailing whoismarkdenome@gmail.com. If you found this interesting and want to hear more, subscribe to my newsletter, follow me on Facebook and Instagram at whoismarkdenome, and find my books for sale on Amazon and Kindle. Feel free to contribute to my efforts via patreon.com/whoismarkdenome. Every moment of every day, we are leaving an impression of ourselves on this earth and on each other. A better world is possible. I'm asking you to help create it.